Hello, everybody. This is a special edition of AAMI News In Conversation. I'm Brian, and we're here at AAMI Exchange 2023 in California, Long Beach. It's a beautiful day today, and we're starting this morning today with Erin Sparnon from ECRI. We're going to call it ECRI for the whole rest of the time we're here. But Erin, can you introduce yourself and tell us who you are?
Hi, I'm Erin Sparnon. I'm a senior engineering manager at ECRI, which means I manage a team that gets their hands on medical equipment, tests it, writes about it. We do accident investigations. We find out what happens when things go wrong. And that information, we've been doing it for 50 years. That's not new. AI is a little new, but not quite as new as you'd think. But the skills that we learned in troubleshooting, in investigation, and in what could go wrong and what to do about it apply to just about anything and AI enabled.
Right. And for our viewers who might not know Erin all that well, Erin's a kind of a regular contributor to our columns at AAMI. She talks a lot about AI. You do sessions for us. We actually just wrapped up a session here at AAMI Exchange. And Erin is an award winner this year, right? You are a Publications Award winner for, can you tell me the name of your article? Do you remember?
How to find AI-enabled technologies in your facility and govern them.
Right, and this was a very hot article. I remember at the time seeing the numbers come in and who were reading it right away. So we knew, that told us, oh wow, this is something that everyone really cares about. I'm guessing health technology management people, HTM pros, are probably getting worried that their clinicians are bringing AI into the hospital without them knowing. Is that the case?
Especially in things like the emergency department, you might find pocket ultrasound that's sending images up to the cloud, getting some analysis. These are things that clinicians are just buying for their own use. So they might not think to tell the folks in their organization, hey, got this new thing in my pocket. It's sending information to the cloud.
Oh, interesting. And, when we talk about that, I guess that could be a cybersecurity risk.
Depending on what's on that data stream going out.
Sure. Okay. But what are the main concerns then? Is it more about bias? Is it more about just taking up bandwidth?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
So in the article, I go through a handful of questions that HTM professionals can use to start and keep going a conversation with their clinicians. Things like, what are you using it for? What are you trying to get out of this system? What do you think it's going to do, and how are you going to measure that? And are you confident that it's going to work on the types of patients that you're seeing?
Okay, yeah, and I guess that's a big call to action. This is something you actually mentioned in your session a little bit, which was it's kind of the HTM's professional to look at the training data and then talk to the clinicians. Why would they want to do that?
Sure. So HTM has a rich history of patient safety. So the vast majority of managing AI-enabled technologies are the same troubleshooting, problem-solving, getting to the bottom, looking at what could go wrong in risk management that we do for any clinical system. The few things that are different, so, with an AI-enabled system, the system might not be able to tell you why it failed or why it gave you an incorrect answer, an unclear answer, but outside of that, clinicians can recognize that as a failure. They should report it as a failure. In your system, you should treat it like a failure, track it, resolve it with the supplier, figure out what happened. All of those management activities are what HTM's been doing for years.
Okay. And you know what? I'm going to roll this back a second because some of our viewers might be thinking, all right, Erin provided one example of AI being brought into the hospital, but what else do I have to worry about? What are we seeing today, right now, in the health technology field?
Sure. So still the largest sector of AI-enabled technologies that have gotten through FDA are in imaging.
Oh, okay.
So whether that's image analysis, whether it is simply like resizing and setting up an image for a radiologist to view, it might be prioritizing work lists. So looking at the images ahead of time and saying, hey, you need to look at these patients first because they're more likely to have something wrong with them, so your radiologist should look at it earlier in the day when they're fresh.
Okay.
Those sorts of technologies are really, really common.
Kind of to reduce burnout in this case, right?
Sure, and try to get better results out of the humans that get tired over time.
Right, lighten the workload. I can see that. Your article mentioned some of the issues with troubleshooting AI systems. You mentioned some examples already. Let's dive more into that.
Sure. So I guess the first question is, does the user know that trouble has occurred? So it needs to be real clear to the user, when not to trust the system. So I would much rather have the system say inconclusive or not give a result than you're like, it's probably okay, and give an answer.
Right. We don't want to make assumptions. I can see.
Right. So identifying the failure is the most, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, making sure that clinician knows to report that failure for follow-up, because that's the information that the HTM, risk management, and the vendor can use together to figure out what happened. I mean, you're still never going to know exactly why the dots led to this incorrect result,
Right.
but that information can help the vendor better tailor their next iteration of the system to say, yeah, the last time we looked at 50 patients like this, this weird thing happened.
And so you're talking about kind of collaborating with the vendor here. Is the burden always going to be on the HTM professionals, or are they the people who should be the middleman between, say, clinicians, acquisition, that kind of side of things?
So HTM has that lovely skill set
Yeah.
of working with vendors in safety critical applications. And so, as HTM, number one is, can we identify all the systems that are already sneaking into our hospitals? So once we do that, then it's getting involved in those conversations with clinicians, IT, where you're aware of what's coming in the building. So keep those conversations going. I mean, you don't need to form a new multidisciplinary committee, but you're already probably talking to IT and clinicians and your safety folks on a regular basis. Just check in. Hey, what are you guys using? Have you bought anything new recently? Oh, hey, you did. Well, what date is it using? Well, what vendor are you working with? Okay, you can kind of follow the string down and take a look at, whether they've done their homework in terms of did they buy what they thought they were buying? Are their expectations reasonable? Do they have metrics that they're using to measure system performance? And are they coming back and actually looking at those metrics and making sure it's doing what they wanted it to do?
Oh, I see. So even if their expectations are reasonable, how do they know whether or not they're actually meeting those expectations with this tool?
If you don't track performance, you'll never know.
Okay.
So if it's an identification algorithm, okay, well, over the last several months of all the patients you've fed to it, how many times was it wrong?
I see. So, you provided a really great example in your session that just passed. That was kind of watching the evolution of an AI technology in real time, where they did exactly what you're talking about. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? This was an Epic, right? This was Epic's
so
public
this
side.
is super well publicized. You can find it anywhere. Just Google, Epic sepsis algorithm. And the long story short is that Epic had developed an algorithm to look for patients at risk for sepsis. They developed it at, one IDN. And it was working pretty well for them. So, they had taken a look at training and validation data. They were able to say, hey, here's my expected performance for this system. And, this was back around 2018 or so. They're like, this is so cool. We should give it to everybody. Well, when it turns out, unshockingly, patients actually differ depending on geography, depending on access to care, depending on comorbidities, depending on, are you a small rural tribal population? Are you a large academic medical center? Are you a, critical access hospital? Those patients are quite different, and the algorithm wasn't working so well in a lot of different areas. So, big research paper came out showing how this system wasn't performing as well as it could have in these other populations. And in response, Epic did a few things. So number one, they made some changes to their algorithm in response to all of this information coming in, but they also really changed their approach to how they were going to deploy this technology, where now their recommended path is, you tell Epic that you want this algorithm, you work with them as a facility, you give them some historical data. They validate their algorithm on the historical data. Often it needs tweaking. That's something they found.
Okay.
And then before you release it into clinical use, you have some comfort that it's going to perform on your patients.
Okay, so basically they're saying, is the training data that this algorithm was trained on, does that really align with your own demographics, your own patient sampling?
And so it's not going to fix every problem, but it might get you a little closer and more comfortable because at least you'll identify when it doesn't work too well for your patients before you deploy it.
Right. And is that a good call to action with everyone? Basically train your algorithm on your patients first before deploying every time? Is that a fix-all?
It's not a fix-all. It's a fix plenty, though, and it's something that we've learned as a best practice. So if you're considering a system that's going to be, mining your data and doing something, good news about data, you probably have historical data. So, step one, take that historical data, work with your vendor and say, hey guys, here, show me how well you're going to work on patients like mine.
No, that's good. And so when we're talking about calls to action here, we're coming up on time, but I wanted to ask you, is there anything you want to bring attention to? Maybe something that ECRI's doing, or just, hey, HTM folks, make sure you do this, if not anything else?
So if not anything else, at least take the article and the handful of questions in the article, talk to the clinicians in your facility, find the techie ones who are bringing in new technology all the time and have a bunch of stuff in their pockets, find those people and talk to them. See what they're using, see what they're interested in, and start asking those questions and get to know them. Keep following up with them because things change over time and you never know what's going to come into your facility.
I see. So, Erin, I understand there is one other project that you're pretty excited about going on at ECRI. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. We just found out this week that we are the recipient of a Mary Logan Research Grant, which we are incredibly excited to get started on. So the issue we're following is the performance of isolation gowns. So you may remember we had a pandemic. We had to use to use a technical term, a very large amount of isolation gowns.
Right.
And we kept getting reports through our patient safety organization of things like strike through and bleed through. So if a clinician is all gowned up and they're leaning against a soiled patient to provide care, maybe the bed is soiled, but they have to reach over it to get to the patient. Maybe they're trying to help the patient stand. And these isolation gowns, which, they're meeting the industry standards,
Right.
but they're still not providing the performance that the clinicians want because nobody wants to be exposed to somebody else's ick. And so we've started doing some testing of these gowns, using the standard test methods, finding some places where a gown might indeed meet the published standard, but might not meet the expectations of what we'd like it to do. And so we're really excited to use the Logan Grant to help us get to the bottom of that performance and inform the standards community and the healthcare community about that real-world performance of gowns that are meeting industry standards, but not living up to what our clinicians are hoping for.
So is the expectation here that you're going to be kind of changing validation process or anything like that? What do you see as success for this?
Sure. So success for this looks like finding out with enough confidence what the performance really is when we're using these test methods that have often been designed for cloth and cotton textiles, but are now being used on these, non-woven polymer gowns.
Okay. Yeah.
Identifying where, performance is not meeting our expectations and clinicians' expectations, because our expectation is that it's going to provide, a high level of protection. Identifying where technologies are meeting the published standard, but kind of failing folks' expectations.
I see. Okay. And are we going to see publications out from this? What's the next thing?
Yeah. So we're going to be, we're going to be buying an environmental chamber. We're going to be carefully conditioning the textiles because you need to do that before you can subject them to these tests where you shower water on them, you pressurize the water under them and see what comes up. The test methods are absolutely phenomenal to watch. And we're going to be, repeating until we're real confident that we have found what we're looking for and that we know what that performance is.
Well, I'm fairly confident that you and I are going to be talking a lot more about this as the results come in. So I'm excited to hear more about it, and we'll keep this going. But please enjoy the rest of AAMI Exchange, and I'll see you around.
It's a pleasure, Brian.
All right, thank you, everybody.